So, what we were just listening here is a really rare recording we call the Women Gathering Mushrooms. I think it's in Cameroon, and it's an ancient tribe that is still actually do this ritual, where women take these mushrooms and in the forest, and they start to imitate the sound of the forest. There are a lot of musicians that actually freak out when they listen to this because it goes at any possible against rule of a melody and harmony, but everything is perfectly balanced because they repeat the sound of nature. I'm talking about, you're listening to birds and all these voices, and they are actually staying in different areas. So this helps me to introduce Paolo Pecere that wrote this incredible book. This is my second Bible, because the first Bible is Ethic and Environment from Nature. And it's called the Dio che danza. You have to translate this in English as soon as possible. But it's a book that actually is talking about Dionysus and the concept of shaman, and how ancient and modern tribes today, they get in touch with the environment. Sometimes using drugs, sometimes using rituals, sometimes, the trance. Do you want to continue and explain? You wrote it, so you know better than I. Is this work?
Does this work?
Yes.
Yes.
So, hi everybody. So, I have a challenge. I have to connect wine and an ancient Greek god to the topic of environment. Because that's me here, and that's Jamieson, who's a leading expert of environment and environmental ethics. So where shall I start from? I thought that I will start from wine, because every one of us tasted wine tonight, and Alessandro is an expert of wine, and among other things, he's also very fond of anthropology, which is why he read my book. So I will try to accept this challenge and in a few minutes connect wine with the environment. I will start with my book. This book, The Dancing God, is a book that I wrote after traveling to a lot of countries all around the world. I was in southern India, I was in Pakistan, I was in Western Africa in different countries, in Brazil and in Colombia, looking for so-called possession trance and therapeutic dances. So rituals where people heal themselves by means of ritual dance. It all started with a passion of mine for an ancient Italian tradition, which I heard from my parents. My parents came from a region in southern Italy, which is called Puglia. A few decades ago in Puglia, there was still this ritual of tarantism, or the taranta, so-called, which was about people claiming that they have been bitten by a spider, and they felt bad, they fell down, they couldn't do anything. That happened usually at the beginning of summer, and they called for musicians to heal them. Musicians would go to their place and play for them to heal them. So one of the main scholars of this ritual, which has now disappeared, connected this kind of ritual with the ancient religion of Dionysus, because the ancient Greek colonized southern Italy, and in ancient Greece there were similar kinds of rituals with music, with intoxicating substances, and with people getting into altered states of mind and getting better or healing themselves. So I researched this topic, and I arrived at Dionysus, this god, this ancient god. And this brings us to wine. Because who's Dionysus? Who was Dionysus? You might have seen a lot of amphors from ancient Greek with this bearded man who used to supervise symposia, these meetings of people drinking wine and reading poetry and talking about stuff like we are doing. But actually, Dionysus was much more, was a god that represents and actually is what we would call nature. And this approaches the topic of our connection to nature, but a connection to nature that was not a rational connection to nature, as we have with science, for example, but was more of an emotional connection to nature, because Dionysus was actually not a man. Dionysus was life and death as well. Dionysus, for example, was plants growing and dying every season. Dionysus was animals. He was a bull, for example. And of course he was also a man. Could manifest himself or itself in different ways. And the Greek respected this god, but it was not just a good, character. It was also terrible. Euripides, an ancient author of Greek tragedies, defines Dionysus as very sweet and terrible. And this was connected to one thing that Dionysus invented, which was wine. Dionysus was the inventor of wine. And according to the Greek, wine itself was something good, of course, because it liberates, it allows us to explore sides of ourselves which we usually don't see. But it's also something that can lead us to oblivion and to lose ourselves. So according to the Greek, you can't drink pure wine. So tonight we were poisoned. Yeah, because according to the Greek, wine, the Greek word is pharmakon, connected to pharmacy today, can be a medicine, but it can also be a poison. Another meaning of this word is poison. The Greek wouldn't drink pure wine. They would mix wine with water. And there are traditional songs of the Greek that were sung at symposia, these meetings, where Dionysus himself says, well, I'm going to pour a glass of wine, then a second one, and the third one is for the reckless, and the fourth one is for the crazy people, etc. So they wouldn't drink pure wine. We did. One thing that we have to understand is that Dionysus was not an anthropomorphic being. According to a religious tradition in ancient Greece called Orphism, a religion connected to the ancient poet Orpheus, Dionysus is wine. Because Dionysus' life is the movement of our muscles, is the emotion. So we have to forget about this man, and it's more of an energy. And this brings to the topic that I explored in my book, the connection to nature. Because as a philosopher, a very famous philosopher, Friedrich Nietzsche, pointed out in the 19th century, these rituals devoted to Dionysus were a way, according to Nietzsche, that nature found to reconnect with his estranged son or daughter, the human being. Because in those rituals, people would lose their standard identity, the I, which is a boundary for experience, which is something that comes with norms, with rules, with identity, and nature manifests itself in them directly. And so Dionysus manifests directly in these rituals. So Nietzsche said, in those rituals, nature makes peace with man. And Nietzsche himself realized that something like that happened later in Western Europe, for example, in Germany, and then more recently in Italy too, with Tarantism. So I was attracted by this topic, which is the reason why I decided to travel all around the world, finding for similar rituals where people actually can ritually lose their own standard identity and experience and explore different identities. Sometimes drinking stuff, sometimes just moving and dancing. And this is connected, according to me, with the topic of our connection to nature, because the interesting thing of the Greek is that Dionysus' life, the life of all living beings, is not just good, it's something that unsettling. It's the power that makes you alive, but it's also the power that destroys you. And when we think about nature, we have to understand that we like nature sometimes. We have an aesthetic idea of pristine nature. We love landscapes, etc. But there's also something non-human into that. And I was thinking about this when I read Dale Jamieson's books, because he wrote in particular 2 books. One is called Reason in a Dark Time, and it's about climate change and environmental issues. And so Reason is in the title of this book. And another one, which is a book of short stories, is called Love and Anthropocene, and the Anthropocene. So Reason and Love. So to me that's interesting because it suggests that once we try to rebuild the connection to nature, we have to use reason, but there's also a non-rational side to it that we have to appreciate and reconsider and elaborate, maybe also by means of reason.
Can you explain what is actually the conclusion of your book before actually describing it? But
Well, actually, I'm not going to explain.
Okay.
I'm going to ask some questions.
Okay.
And I think we're going to land on the same place. How many people here are from New York? Among those of you who are from New York, how many of you are really from somewhere else? How many of you have been to Italy?
Oh,
Wow.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right. Now, what I want us to do is to contemplate in some way the strangeness of the world. There are more people here who have been to Italy than are from New York. And there are probably as many people who aren't, in some sense, really from New York who are really from New York. What we have in this room is a pretty good cross-section of who we are as people. We are an incredible mix of the global and the local. We are here appreciating this amazing testament to local craft, handmade, amazing, being lost to globalization experience. It's not even enough to call it food. It's experience. But some of us have traveled a long ways to have this experience. And even those of us who haven't traveled a long ways to have this experience have often come from very diverse histories to land in this place. And to me, that's just a small and wonderful and incredibly pleasurable example that crystallizes the times that we live in, which is when these deep values of love and connection to place that can only arise from experience collide with these more cosmopolitan values, which allow our hosts to start a restaurant in New York, for example, from Italy. And this connects to what Paolo was saying, because what Paolo was telling us is that there are these amazing contradictions within Dionysius. You know, the liberating sense of wine combined with the poisonous, scary sense of wine. And I think that we're in this time of globalization, of climate change, where we have to really look things in the eye in a way that we have long been able to avoid in developed societies. We have to recognize that we have multiple values, multiple things that we love. They aren't all consistent with each other all the time, 24/7. And we're not going to get through this with an algorithm. we're not going to adopt the rational way out. We're going to have to embrace both love and reason. We're going to have to embrace the multiplicity of values that we have. And somehow we're going to have to make it through this. But we're only going to be able to make it through this once we embrace our contradictions and our inconsistencies and our complicated loves and desires. Because it's only with the recognition of who we are and what we love that wisdom can arise.
Oh.
First thing to recognize is that we're not just divided across people, we are each divided in ourselves. And that is the beginning of wisdom. So those of us who believe in climate change and it's a horrible problem and vote for all the right candidates still do things that contribute to climate change. And that's okay, but we have to acknowledge that and we have to recognize that. The division goes not just across communities, it doesn't go just across political parties, it goes within ourselves. By our nature, we are complicated, complex, divided, wild creatures. And it's only by trying to understand and embrace that wildness that we can hope to yoke all of this together in some way that works.
So I want to say something about, since you mentioned the Nazi Germany and we're talking about nature, that's a point I want to make. When we talk about preserving nature, there has been in the past this idea that, there's something like purely untamed, pristine nature. And Nazi ideology included the idea that the ancient forests of Germany had always been there. They were something, a legacy of something very ancient. So how do we get from here to the idea that we have to also use rationality in order to manage the environmental issues? We have to understand that it hasn't been like that. Since human beings exist, landscapes are a result of the interaction between human civilization and something non-human. There's not something like a pure or originally, authentic nature. Today we understand much clearer that national parks, for example, are something that you have to manage.
Okay.
You have to choose which species you want to preserve or reintroduce, etc., etc., etc. You can't just, go back to something that was originally there. And so that means that on the one hand, you might have, hopefully, an emotional connection to nature, to the idea that you want to preserve something that is also non-human. On the other hand, you have to use your rationality in order to get to that. You cannot just have the idea of a primitive state that you want to get back to. That was a modern idea, but it's not true. For example, John Locke, the founder of modern liberalism, wrote in his essay on government, once everything was America. What does it mean? He meant America was the non-cultivated land. So he meant in Europe we have, agriculture, etc. In America it's not like that, but it's gonna become like that. But that was an illusion, like as if there weren't civilizations in the Americas too, who interacted with the environment, had a history of interaction with the environment. So again, it's our responsibility to understand that we partly produce what we see around us. It's not just that there is something original.
There is not this. No, the issue is it's actually part of your book when you're talking about Yosemite Park. I think Yellowstone or Yosemite. Yeah, Yosemite Park. Yeah. It's something as when you start to preserve a part of nature, there is also another part of nature that is not preserved. in order to save the panda bear, there is a bug that will get extinguished because it's not as fancy as the panda bear. Like, oh, it's so cute, let's preserve the panda bear, and who cares about like ugly animals? And so the aesthetical thing that is actually getting the idea that we are not part of nature. Maybe what Dale you actually say in your book, we should substitute the word nature with environment. Environment is Greenwich Village, is Harlem, is the forest, is New Jersey. No, maybe not New Jersey, but
yes,
no,
New Jersey.
I'm joking. I lived in New Jersey 1 year.
Who's from New Jersey? No,
so the concept of it's another thing. One of the things that really shocked me, that linked me also to Harari, is the chapter where you talk about. Can you explain? Which is a beautiful. I don't know how Christian you are, but this is going to be shocking for you. The chapter you talk about how the Christian God fucked up the world in a way, no?
Yeah. Well, I think that's an excellent summary. I mean, actually, the Christian God fucked up the world.
Why you think
okay,
that?
So here's a very simple way of putting it. So if you sort of take a cosmic point of view on earthly belief systems, what really stands out in Christianity, which just jumps out of belief systems that have been held in other cultures, is that God has become a man. And this is profoundly important, the most profound fact of human history. Now, from the perspective of other Middle Eastern belief systems like Judaism and Islam, at least in the more conventional understandings, this is actually a quite blasphemous notion, right? Because God is God. And the idea of thinking that some character named Jesus from some small village in the Middle East is God is blasphemous, right? It's taking away from the power and the uniqueness of God. From the point of view of Hindus or Buddhists or many other kinds of religious traditions, oh, God became a human? Big deal. God is that housefly that you're after with your electronic fly swatter, right? God is a cow. God is a this. God is a that. So much about the environmental attitudes that have been built into, for example, the philosophy of John Locke, that Paolo was talking about, that are built into our systems of government and regulation and property, really flow from this idea of the uniqueness of Homo sapiens, of humans, which again flow from the idea that we're made in the image of God, and guess what? One of us is saving the world.
As if there weren't civilizations in the Americas too, who interacted with the environment, had a history of interaction with the environment. So again, it's our responsibility to understand that we partly produce what we see around us.
I just want to say one thing first, which is pristine nature that Paolo was talking about is the Garden of Eden, basically. That's where the myth of pristine nature comes from. We fell from the Garden of Eden. Now we're just working our butts off trying to recover it. Guess what? I'm here to tell you it ain't going to happen. We're going to have to deal with this sinful, tragic world in which we find ourselves. Now, how do we muddle through? And this gets us immediately to questions of politics. And, you know that phrase rhino, which Trump has made famous, Republican in name only? I've come to calling America dino, democracy in name only. And you know, wherever we are, we're going to have to think through our political institutions in a really serious way, because these are collective action problems, and it's going to take institutional solutions to them.
Are you optimist or pessimist?
Well, so I like to call myself a realist. And I live like an optimist, you know. I'm a happy person who enjoys life. I think you've noticed this, right? But at the same time, I'm not going to restrain myself from saying from trying to call out the delusions that I think are driving us off the cliff. And many of these delusions are held by people I love and people I care about and people who are well-meaning, and even me on a bad day. right? But we need to think that we can talk realistically about where we are and what needs to be done without in some way this being a bummer or, you know, a bad person or rude or something like that.
Paolo, you're optimist or pessimist of the future?
Well, well, I think that we have to be realistic again. I want to tell you a story about my experience in different countries in Africa, to make a point concerning the possible way we can use our fascination with nature in order to promote environmental progress. Because sometimes, since he was talking about the legacy of Jew and Christian religion and monotheism in general. So sometimes some people say we should go back, you know, to animism, to this belief in the fact that all nature is animated, which belongs to people all around the world. So I was in a
Sheldrake in a way.
Yeah. So I visited people in Amazonia, animists. I was in Africa in many countries, and I have to point out that besides some people who live very isolated from our society, we are into the same situation. We have to find out a way to deal with the environmental issues together, and we cannot rely on this idea again that there is something like this animistic belief and then it's gonna save us. Because if you go to, for example, Nigeria, I was in Nigeria 2 years ago. So Nigeria, environmentally speaking, is a nightmare. There's oil in Nigeria, as you might know. It's a theoretically rich country, but most of the people live with no light, polluted water. It's a catastrophe. Corrupted country. It's a federal country. It's a big country. Population of Nigeria might become more larger than the population of the US in 30 years. Okay?
Because how many inhabitants is that so?
Yeah, with this rate of growth.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, now they are 250 million.
Right.
Something like that, yeah. So I went to Lagos, the capital, and Lagos is a megalopolis, a polluted city. It's very dangerous. And I was walking around. Actually, I decided to walk around, and to figure out what was happening. And so then I visited places where these animistic beliefs still exist. For example, a grove, very famous grove, in the middle of the country, which is devoted to the goddess Oshun, which is a African goddess. And there's a very nice myth about that there were lumberjacks cutting a tree, and the tree started moaning and crying, and it was the goddess that said, "This is my sacred grove, you cannot cut the trees. So you, in order to apologize, you will have to bring gifts every year." And they do a festival every year, okay? So this looks like a magical, ecologically speaking, mythical place. But indeed, around that, it's a nightmare again. And when I was there, I looked at this river in this beautiful grove, and the river was golden. And I wondered why. I mean, this color was amazing. There was a beautiful light, so hot. And I asked the guy, "Why is that golden?" And he said, "Well, they are putting chemicals upstream from there's an industry there, so it was green, this river. So even the sacred grove is polluted." And then I went to the forest. So Nigeria was covered with forests. More than 90% of those forests have been destroyed. I went to the cross-state river state in the Far East, the border with Cameroon, and I explored the forest with rangers, and the animals were gone. So I asked a Dutch journalist whom I knew living in Nigeria what happened with the animals, and she said maybe they escaped or maybe they were eaten by people. And then I talked to the ranger, and he said, "Look, we get no salary, so we have to take money from the people and sell trees and sell animals." So this brings me to the point. the thing that saves environments in many countries of Africa is tourism, even if we don't like it, because then they have to protect. And tourism means that you have to have a safe country, otherwise people won't go there. I was going there, but there were difficult moments on that trip. But people don't go there. And so there's no tourism, there's no money, because nobody arrives with money. So there's no salary for the rangers, so the rangers sell the forest. So we have to, this is an example of what I want to say. Even if you have a beautiful tradition of connection with the environment and the gods and this idea of animism, people still have to live, to make money, to earn money. And if you don't have some economical, interest in the protection of nature, that's not going to happen. The point I wanted to make is that we should not idealize some cultures, even though these cultures are very important and we have to learn a lot from them, into thinking that people, when they have a history of hundreds of years of connection to our civilization, care about money as well. It's a colonial ideology to think that they are enemies, and we care about money.
Okay, that's okay.
So actually, even
okay.
even when I met a so-called shaman in the Amazon, deep in the forest.
Oh, can you tell? Sorry to interrupt you. Can you tell? The most interesting part of his book is about the origin of the word shaman.
Uh-huh.
So we consider shaman something that comes from Central America, but it's not true, right?
No.
No. What's the origin of why people say shaman?
Well, the word shaman is a word coming from a language in Siberia today. So the origin of that word is comes from there, and the Europeans discovered this word in the 18th century when the queen of Russia wanted to explore her regions and sent explorers and philosophers there. So they came back with reports and they said there are these shamans. And then all of Europe knew about this because there was a very famous philosopher working with her at that time, Denis Diderot. And he came back and then he wrote an article in the Encyclopedia about shamans. And he said, well, they might be charlatans, but they kind of deal with medicine. They say they can cure you, and they have a particular connection to nature. So since shamans there were people entitled with communicating with nature spirits, and for example, making deals. I'm gonna kill these animals, and a few people are gonna die, so there's a balance. This kind of thing has been observed in the Americas as well. So possibly there has been a tradition moving with populations across the Bering Strait.
Okay.
Because ethnically speaking, they come from there. Anyway, when Western people observed these populations and they saw that there were these so-called medicine men, as they used to say originally, dealing the same with nature, with hunting practices and healing people, etc., and going into trance, they said these are shamans at a certain
But
stage.
in Mexico,
So we
they call
say-
themselves shamans too, even though it's not a Mexican word, it's not an...
Yeah, because
right.
that's how it is.
Right.
That's how it is.
Well, it's-
We cultures tend to,
Yeah.
Which is, globalization...
Yeah, we're back to globalization.
but globalization started 40,000 years ago.
Right,
That's what
we're
I'm
back to
saying. It didn't start
globalization.
with internet
But-
and Larry Page. It started...
No, absolutely. I always say there was always social media, just not electronic social media.
I think exactly.
But I do want to go back to the sorts of things that were being reported from Nigeria and from Tanzania and so on, and really, to quote Bob Dylan, bringing it all back home. What I feel Americans don't we tend not to understand is how much of what goes on over there that we deplore flows from decisions that we make here. And some of those
What do
decisions...
you mean with over there?
Yeah, what is over there?
I mean, so Nigeria,
Okay.
pollution,
Italy.
resource...
Outside of US.
I'm talking about the developing world, of which Italy has not yet fallen into that category.
But we've been affected
Not
by
yet.
American cultural. I can't discuss about it. I feel
We're working on
colonized
it.
with that.
Yeah, I know. It's like an aspiration on the part of some political parties. I recognize that. But you know, there are decisions that are made at the very abstract level of public policy. So, for example, when the United States sends foreign aid, there's a requirement that we have to buy American commodities that are shipped on that are shipped by American shipping lines, which means that almost all of our American foreign aid money goes to Americans, even if it would be much cheaper to buy locally sourced food and to give it to hungry people. So there are technical decisions like that are made at the governmental level, which have huge offshore impacts, not to mention what happens by decisions made by multinational corporations and decisions that are made in terms of our own consumption. So I always think it's a good rule of thumb that every time you hear a story about what's happening over there, think about the causal chain that you might be implicated in that is actually going to have that result, which is beyond your light of sight.
What is actually, and this actually might brings the subject of Lovelock, you know, that there is a part of your book that Lovelock has always been misinterpreted even by himself. So in a way, no, Lovelock is a guy in 1967, I guess, or something like that. I know he wrote a book that says the Gaia hypothesis of Earth, and Earth is an ecosystem that is interconnected and is stronger than you think. Don't think that nature is a weak thing. We human beings might be weak, but actually nature has been survived to a lot of destruction. Technically, we are entering the sixth. No, you're talking about the sixth destruction, extinction in a way. Right. Are we in the sixth extinction or not?
Yeah, we are in the sixth extinction.
It's established.
That's just an empirical.
No hope.
That's an empirical.
Let's get drunk then.
I mean, there's not in the scientific community. There's not much controversy.
There's no way.
But your point about Lovelock's very important. The Earth is very resilient. I mean, we are dealing with very resilient systems. What isn't clear is how resilient industrial societies are. Industrial societies are highly specialized. Now, you know, we began to see that with the COVID epidemic. You know, it doesn't take much to disrupt our supply chains. And all of a sudden, oh my God, I can't get this, I can't get that. Why does it take so long for this, right? So what we have to worry about is our resilience, not really the resilience of the planet.
Yeah.
So first of all, I think it's the anthropocentrism of Christianity that is central, that I was trying to point out. Interestingly, the apocalyptic tradition, the eschatological tradition, to use the Greek term, runs through almost all religions. I mean, there are apocalyptic Jewish sects for that matter. You know, some of which are gaining some influence these days. There are apocalyptic Buddhist sects. There are apocalyptic kind of a-religious sects, if you will. So I think this, you know, QAnon is kind of an apocalyptic religion, if you will. So I don't think it's the apocalyptic nature of Christianity that's special about it. I think it's the anthropocentrism. I mean, early Christianity was apocalyptic. It was clear that when John wrote Revelation, he thought the world was coming to an end very quickly. But then Christianity very quickly learned to think of itself as being in for the long haul, and started, you know, developing the whole tradition of the papacy and the Holy Roman Empire and the pillaging of the rest of the world. Sorry.
At this point, would you... Well, no. In the last chapter of the book, I just point out that we don't have to think that those rituals that I've been talking about in the book belong to the antiquity or to lost traditions. The truth is that any tradition has been reinventing on and on their own beliefs and rituals. And so I happened to be here when there was the World Pride, and I was looking at these people dancing along the street, and it looked like something that might have been similar to what happened in ancient Athens, when people, often male, dressed up like women, were going around on the street. So that was the point, that we should not idealize traditions as something, again, pristine, and the antiquity of them, because even in traditions there is a constant change. Even Dionysus for the Greek in Athens in the 5th century before Christ was a god that they had to understand, because they didn't know the past of this tradition. We discovered that he came from Crete, but they believed that he came from India.
Probably
so,
in
for
this
example.
I mean, history
Maybe
is
drugs.
is a resource for the present and the future.
Yeah.
And the same thing is true of tradition. And you know, this story that Paolo is telling about the invented traditions is one that should be familiar to us. I mean, if you're someone who has, say, a Scottish last name, you can go to Edinburgh or wherever and you can buy a tartan. These tartans were invented in the wake of Sir Walter Scott's novels romanticizing Scottish history.
Ah, okay.
I mean, the invention of tradition is ubiquitous, and it's easy then to sort of be a nihilist about tradition, right? Like, I mean, I'm David Bowie. I'm the man who fell from space. What's tradition? I mean, what does the past have to do with me? Which is in some ways where we are in America. And the fact is, the past has a lot to do with you, because first of all, it made you who you are in some sense, and secondly, your understanding of the past is a very rich resource. I just want to misquote William Faulkner now.
Okay.
The Nobel Prize winning Southern American writer, which is, the past is not past, it's not even over.
So I wanted to add to him, in a similar sense, talking about the invention of tradition, we shouldn't blame just, Hebrew or Christian religion for anthropomorphism, because first there was a shared culture at the time of the elaboration and writing of those texts, and the controversy in between religions produced a strong separation, but indeed there was a common cultural background. So when Jesus in the gospel says, "I am the true vine," he's rejecting a kind of religion like Dionysian religion, because there was something like that, non-Christian religions of the vegetation, of plants, etc., back then in Israel as well. So he wanted to contrast that, but actually that was a common background. So when we talk about anthropomorphism, we also have to blame, for example, Greek philosophy, because Aristotle is is the one who was taught as the main philosophy in European universities, and he claims that human beings only have a rational soul, and slaves, women, and animals are inferior beings, etc., etc. Of course, this was connected to religion by Christian philosophers of the Middle Ages.
If you wanted to read one book that has all the arguments for vegetarianism that have been given for 1,500 years, read Porphyry. Porphyry was essentially a Stoic philosopher from, I think, the 4th century AD, common Christian era.
Porphyry.
Yeah, Porphyry. And the other great book that Porphyry wrote, in addition to one on the one's called On the Abstinence from Animal Flesh, which is also a book against animal sacrifice. The other great book he wrote was about why Christians should be persecuted. So, I mean, so this idea that somehow there is something about Christianity that aligns, at least by the 4th century, on the wrong side of a lot of issues is already starting to emerge.
Yeah.
Can I radicalize my question?
We are embodied in an ape. We are apes in this room, essentially. And we have all of the qualities, really, that other apes have in terms of our biases and our sensory systems and so on and so forth. At the same time, we are capable, to some extent, of the point of view of something like the universe, trying to look at things impartially outside of our apeness and to try to get a more universal view of the world. And in some ways, that's just a fundamental contradiction and paradox with which we live. And the worst sin we can make is to think that we can somehow completely transcend our apeness to actually seeing the world in a fully objective and impartial point of view. We cannot. Let's do a controlled experiment. Let's give the mushrooms to the apes and see what we wind up with.
It has been done a lot of times,
But you know, going back to your point, sometimes I wonder, so if you take dogs and rabbits, for example, they have vastly more sophisticated olfactory senses than we do, vastly more sophisticated sense of taste. Both dogs and rabbits.
Of course.
I mean, in terms of sensors. Now we've just been, treated to this amazing meal, but we're like.
Dogs are the best sommelier in the world.
Well, right, but we're like, but we're like sensorily impaired.
Yeah, this is 1 million times more.
Yeah, that's right. In experiencing this meal. Yeah, that's right. Compared to what a dog or a rabbit would be. Now that's a really amazing thought experiment to imagine. What sort of wine and food could possibly mean to beings that have vastly more sophisticated. Well, so morality is a different thing. We haven't been talking about morality, and the way that morality works is just to describe it, is those closest to us are the most important. So if a dog is close to me, that's more important than some faceless stranger. So we've created this unbelievable industrial machine which has created incentives all over the world. It's created supply chains. It's led to all kinds of behavior that's quite invisible to us, that is economically rational for people in other parts of the world. And that's much more powerful at this point, I think, than any particular ideas that we may have. But I do think that there's a certain set of ideas that sort of had something to do with giving rise to this industrial machine. That would be the way, at least, that I would explain it. Sorry? What?
I would just like thinking about how much is unbalanced all this conversation, and I can't remove gender out of this conversation. There is 3 shaman here on this table that can extend humanity, and there are 3 women. All that is created, like pollution and industrial regime, or whatever, how you want to call it, removed us from the narrative, and even now here we are removed from the narrative. It's a little sad. It is.
Well, insert yourself into the narrative then.
Well, I wish I had so much to say, but I didn't want to
go for it.
Be an asshole at this point. I think with the wine or whatever, nobody's here anymore. I think I can say it, but it feels pretty loud.
But say something. No, but assert something that you think hasn't been asserted. That would be really useful, I think.
Well, I could, but I don't have to. I just want to also make a statement that it's a women is so powerful in a way that could really extend humanity, and no matter that is not so involved in a conversation like this one, which is a little sad. Beatrice, Tiziana, and I are on this table. Also, another man, but we didn't have a word on this. It's a little sad.
I really would like to hear. I think it's a very important point, how the gender
play a part on environmental.
And clearly you have views about it. It's true that it's time to say something. So I've heard your I was just listening because I felt I was learning a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not in my hurry to shut up, but in this case, I was learning a lot, and clearly you know much more than I do about
why
the way.
Because I wanna speak a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. So
no, I don't know.
But if you
much
don't, then
about
why do you protest? You should be like me,
I just feel
enjoying that you're learning. If you have something to say, you should say it.
I just said it.
But that's just a protest. That's not. I would like to learn about.
What do you want to learn
I'm
about?
sure you're right that it is a pity that that there has been no discussion about.
I've been hearing that so many things that, of course, I had an opinion on, but also there is a lot from a male perspective on this conversation, and even rituality and all that. Yeah, it would have been interesting to hear a woman voice since we are sitting on this table. However, I don't have, again, it's just like, an opinion that would have been nice also to intervene in between conversation. I'm not making a statement about environmental, or climate change right now. I'm just saying that would have been nice also to interchange, even like, the people that were here, everybody. It seems like a very strictly point of view.
I mean, so there is this tradition that identifies rationality as being male, for example, and part of where that tradition comes from is because the history of philosophy is so male and it centers rationality. But that's not true of all figures in the history of philosophy. There are some female philosophers, for example, who also center rationality, and there are people like David Hume who do not center rationality, who's someone I think I don't know if I mentioned here, but I mentioned earlier today. And in fact, one of the early great feminist philosophers, Annette Beyer, has a paper called David Hume, the Feminist Hero, who singles him out as somebody in history of philosophy who emphasized the importance of emotions and demoted reason. And I mean, I don't think this touches any of the points that were made over here, which is, I think, about sort of the representation of voices. But in terms of the content, which is more the issues that you're raising, I certainly think, I tend to demote reason. I think that was the message that I got across. And part of it is because I have been influenced by those voices. But I also think there's a kind of essentialism that you can buy into. The other side of reason is male is that emotions are female. And I don't think the essentialism actually works fully on either side of this. The end point of this is sort of no one has standing really to talk about anything because everybody is speaking from a place. And again, that was a point I was sort of trying to make about kind of being embodied apes trying to speak from the point of view of the universe. We can't really do that. Nobody can really speak from the point of view. The only thing I'm wanting to insist upon is I think there's always a legitimate issue about voices. It's just that it sort of doesn't end because there's always voices that aren't represented. But when it comes down to actually what people are saying, I think it's important to respect individuals for what they're saying and not think that their views can simply be reduced to something that's some broad, social category. That's all. At least personally, I don't want my views that are based on decades of contemplation to be reduced to that. And I doubt that you want your views reduced to the fact that you're just the woman at the table who is saying something. You want to be who you are, and your views taken seriously for who you are. So that's the only other point that I wanted to.
That's what I'm saying. Like the sacred concept of identity that is beyond gender. We're talking about, all those things.
Yeah.
That's why
Yeah.
I thought that was like relative, what do I say?
That's right.
And in order to unlearn, you have to listen. Envision a world that you've never seen, because it was not made by people like you. That's what I'm saying. We never had the possibility to create and be, the honor of this idea, this project, this and that, and how all the systemic, everything that works. That's what I'm saying. What I'm asking is not I can't speak. What I'm saying is like, step back, create space for me to talk, create space for others that usually are at the bottom of this pyramid to be protagonists. And guess what? You might can have all the inspiration you're looking for.
I don't think you responded to his question. I think you responded to what you're thinking about. I think his question is really something like this: aren't we living in something that looks like the Weimar Republic? Which is
Exactly.
Which is basically we have, you can characterize these views however you want. Left and right is not a very good characterization, but we have people on the one hand who, like our former President Trump, who rapes women and boasts of it, and basically it doesn't seem to hurt his presidential campaign. And on the other hand, we have communities where if you misgender someone, it seems like you might lose your job. And it's sort of the extremity of what's...
I don't believe in these two extremities, though. They are not comparable. Because this is a system, one is a system that's been going on for centuries. Another one, it just...
Well, not only is that not responsive...
pushing now sometimes.
Not only is that not responsive to what I was saying, it's not responsive to what I would have said had I completed my sentence. I mean, where I was going with this is not who's right and who's wrong, but I think he was asking a political question about the viability of a society that is that riven by points of view that are so sort of radically incommensurable. That I think was the question.
Yeah, no,
and the historical record, is not good. I mean, the historical record is that those kinds of societies collapse.
But those extremes that you are comparing, I don't think they do exist.
Well, I don't know what to
That's
say.
it is. One is very powerful, the other one doesn't have any power really. Like when you say that there's a part of you know, the
Yeah, no, I don't think that's right. I mean, look, I've been working in a university for a long time, and the point of view that you express is a very powerful perspective. I think in a lot of cultural institutions, and not just universities in America. So I think it is. I think among people who identify with the left, I think your perspective is quite familiar. Actually, I think for people who identify with the right, it's alien and it's devil talk and all of that sort of stuff. And I think that's the point that Alexandra was.
To that point, that on that political side, to the left side, also it feels to people that do want to advance on these topics, it feels they're wasting time on words.
And I have to say, for those of us who really care a lot about the non-human world, it's very frustrating that humans spend so much, time in our own politics.
Good night, everybody. Good night.
Good night. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.